Day 4 of San Francisco's training camp just wrapped up, and in today's video I want to examine some players that really stood out. I'm not focusing on the quarterback battle as I've already made a video about that today. Rather, in today's video, I really want to highlight some players that stood out. The first player that I must mention that's made a name for himself throughout this whole entire training camp and really throughout the last 3 years he's been in the league is Brandon Aiyuk. I love watching this guy. He's my favorite 49er, and I hope the Niners are able to bring him back on a massive contract. Let's talk about what he specifically did today to draw this praise from me. He caught 4 touchdown passes on 5 targets today. 3 of those were from Sam Darnold, and 1 of those was from Brandon Allen. And Aiyuk's done this throughout his whole entire camp experience so far. No one can guard him. He spoke with the media after practice today, and he even gave some insight, saying that now he doesn't have to think about the playbook, really what he's running. And this offseason, rather than focusing his emphasis on his upper body, really gaining strength, he worked on his lower body, getting its conditioning right. And so far throughout training camp, he's the best player on the field. Moving on to another player that performed well today is George Kittle. He caught a nice pass from Lance, and that was probably Lance's best throw of the day. It was a deep seam route to George Kittle, and it was perfectly thrown. Other notes specifically for the offensive line is who's been starting when Trent Williams has had rest days. Today, Trent Williams and Christian McCaffrey both had rest days alongside Brock Purdy. And in today's practice, who started underneath Trent Williams was Jalen Moore, the Niners' long-term swing tackle. And many people expected that there would be a better competition between Matt Pryor, but it looks like currently Moore has this job held down. And Colt McKivitz does look solid so far in practice. I mean, he's moving well, and I'm excited to really see how this takes shape once pads come on. In all transparency though, Colt McKivitz did have 1 false start today, but he has been moving around nicely throughout camp, and I expect him to perform well once pads come on. Moving on to someone who's done well but also struggled due to fumbles throughout this camp is Jordan Mason. So far throughout this training camp, he's fumbled the ball twice. Without pads on, that's not a great thing. And if he's serious about competing with Elijah Mitchell for the running back 2 role, that frankly won't do. Moving on to the defensive side of the ball, where we saw Steve Wilks really up his aggressive nature today. We saw him blitz several times, which did leave Drake Jackson one-on-one with Elijah Mitchell 20 yards down the field. Jackson has done great throughout camp on the defensive line, but I didn't really expect him to be challenged in coverage immediately in camp, but that's what happened, and he did fantastic, going stride for stride with Elijah Mitchell, who ran his 40-yard dash in 4.3 seconds and broke up the pass. He was fantastic and looks so much better than he did last year. He's much bigger, but he's moving around fantastically with this new weight. Another defensive player that's come on recently is D. Winters, and today was no exception. He made a nice tackle in the backfield against an undrafted free agent running back, Kalen LeBourne. Jumping back to the Niners defensive line, a player that's really impressed throughout training camp and has been no different today was Kevin Givens, as he did register a sack on the day. Another player that was pretty impressive and stood out throughout training camp so far is Spencer Waege. He's from North Dakota State, much like Trey Lance. And today, when Trey Lance scored a touchdown potentially on a running play, it looked like to me that Spencer Waege would have tackled him before he actually would have got that touchdown. We don't know because these are unpadded practices and you're not ever able to touch a quarterback anyways. But overall, the Niners defensive line was dominant today. They've gotten more sacks today than probably any other day due to Steve Wilks' high blitz rate, but we won't really see that too much on the quarterback numbers because they still will throw even if a defensive lineman gets the sack on the play. Moving on to maybe players that didn't perform as well on the defensive side is Charvarius Ward. He sat out again this practice, and it was disclosed that's most likely due to groin tightness. And even though Charvarius Ward has missed some practices and the Niners quarterbacks did better today than previous practices, their secondary is looking locked down this year thanks to Steve Wilks. Finally, perhaps one of the most notable things about training camp is that there's been really no talk about Jake Moody. He's been perfect throughout training camp. I don't think he's missed any of his kicks yet, which is fantastic since the Niners did draft him in the 3rd round. This year, I think Jake Moody is going to replace Robbie Gould nicely. This is going to give the Niners a bigger range on their kicks, and I think that he's going to be better in kickoff coverage than Gould as well. Additionally, Mitch Wishnowski's back problem looks to be solved as he is removed from the injured players list. With these unpadded practices wrapped up, we should get a better glimpse of the players that will make a real impact in game situations when the pads come on. This is really when we get into the meat and bones of these training camp practices. Moving into preseason, we'll then see which players are not just practice players performing well during practice, but which players are able to shine when the bright lights come on. Ultimately, I'm super excited for this next period in this training camp and off-season mode moving into regular season. But what are you guys most excited for? These upcoming padded practices, preseason, who are you looking forward to seeing? I'd love to hear down below in the comment section. It would also mean a ton to me if you liked and subscribed. And as always, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day.